Do you ever worry that homeschool is maybe not enough? Do you ever worry that your kids might be falling behind? What can you do about it? Hi, I am Rachel from 7 and All. I'm a second-generation homeschooler who loves to have nerdy homeschool conversations here on YouTube. And today I'm going to be talking about all those times when you are feeling worried that maybe what you are doing as a homeschooler isn't enough, and you worry about whether your child might be behind, and how would you even know if they are behind? Now, this is the point where I'm supposed to say, you are enough, Mama. God has given you these children and He knows what they need and He's given them you, and it's going to be enough, and just don't worry about it. There is no behind. But if you've been around my channel for a while, you probably know that when you're listening to Rachel, that's not really what you're going to hear. Now, raising children, parenting, being responsible for human lives is a very risky journey. It is very scary. There is a lot of natural worry that comes into a mother's life. And we do need to do a lot of relying on God and knowing that He holds the future, and knowing that even though we don't know the future, He does, and being able to trust Him. Yes, there is a lot of uncertainty in parenting and in life. But I think that on this particular topic, there are practical, actionable, reasonable steps that we can take to restore a sense of peace and contentment with our homeschools. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying, first of all, there is absolutely no reason that a homeschool education would be inferior to any other type of school education. It is well known within the world of education that teacher-student ratio is very important to learning outcomes. That teachers who are managing a small number of students versus teachers that are managing a large number of students, if you're going around shopping for schools and money is no object, you're going to choose the one with the smaller class sizes, because it's well known that when you have that smaller ratio, where it's one teacher to a small class size, you're going to have better educational outcomes. That is well known throughout everything. In homeschool, we have that. We have a very small class size. We have a very small one-room schoolhouse. Yes, students are all at different levels, but there's really only a very small few of them, and we have a teacher who is available 24/7. I mean, a lot of times they want to be sleeping, but sometimes the students are awake and they need you, and so of course you're awake too. They have a teacher who is fully committed to their learning, who can give them attention at any time of day, who can put in hours and hours of work into just this small class of 3 students or 5 students or maybe 10 students, but even 10 students is a small class. So there is absolutely no reason why a homeschooled child's education would be inferior to any other child's education from a different type of school. We actually have so much that can lead to homeschool children being successful, to having a fantastic education, just with the resources that homeschoolers have, of a one committed teacher to a small number of students, a great deal of time, because we're not wasting time. We don't have all the wasted time that you have in a classroom. Homeschool can be so successful. However, I have lived in the homeschool world long enough that I have seen homeschool be extremely successful, and I have also seen it to fail. I have also known homeschooled adults who feel that their parents gave them a very inferior education, who are frustrated with the limitations of the education that they got. I've seen homeschool fail. I have. So I know that there's no guarantee that just because you homeschool, your kids are going to get a spectacular education. I'm never going to be a commercial in that sense. So I don't think we should ignore people's concerns when they're worried that they're not doing enough in their homeschool, or that their child is not making enough progress. There will be children who learn at a slower pace due to developmental delays, due to learning disabilities, and that is not something to worry about. The children whose brains are wired in this way would be learning at their own natural pace pretty much regardless of what school they go to, as long as they are being taught with the right types of techniques and materials that work for the way their brains are wired. So that's not an area where I would worry about a slower pace. However, your child might not be making progress in reading or in math, and that's actually because you are being too inconsistent with how often school is actually happening, or other reasons that are much more within your control. So as you think about whether you're doing enough, I want you definitely to be thinking about the difference between factors that are in your control and factors like the way your child learns, how their brains are wired, what their abilities are. There are a difference between those. One of those is in your control and the other one is not. Now, after that preface, let's get started with my tips for what to do when you are worried about your homeschool and whether it's enough and whether your children are making enough progress. Number one, if you're worried, stop and consider, what are you actually worried about? Really think about it and try to identify, are there any specific things that are concerning you? Any specific problems that you can identify? Staying in the worry cycle isn't helpful at all, but taking the time to figure out what are you specifically worried about can be helpful, because when you identify the issue, you can then figure out a plan to address the issue. So maybe you're feeling worried, are you doing enough? When you stop to think about it, you can think about, oh, here's something I'm worried about. My child's in 4th grade, they're working a lot on division, but I'm realizing they haven't actually mastered their multiplication facts. That's causing problems, that's slowing us down. So there's a worry, a specific actionable worry right there. You realize that your child doesn't have their multiplication facts mastered. Or here's another worry. You are reading lots of great living books aloud to your children, but as you ask questions, as you discuss, as you narrate, you are realizing that one of your children does not have good comprehension and they don't have good recall of the stories that you're learning. There's a specific worry and a problem, because you're reading a lot, you're doing a lot, but the amount of learning that's happening is very small. Those are examples of specific things. So don't just stay in that worried cycle. Figure out, what is it exactly that's worrying you? Number two, if you are worried that your children are just kind of generally behind and you don't even know where to start with figuring out what would behind look like, you can always start by looking at the state standards, the state educational standards for whatever state that you live in. Now, this is a recommendation that you'll get from all sorts of homeschool moms. I would have a few reservations about this suggestion, just because, one, you do need to realize that in a public school, they can have the standards for 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. Realize that that does not mean that all kids in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, whatever, it does not mean that all kids know all the things in the standards. There is a wide range in the classroom, and any teacher would be able to tell you that. The standards are set, but there's only limited connection to the reality of what kids actually know. Number two, I have looked at a lot of state standards and I don't usually find them to be all that impressive or inspirational. They tend to be relatively surface level and basic for good reason. They're not trying to specify every single thing that a child should be able to do and all of their critical thinking skills. There's a lot of skills that are kind of intangible. So you might almost set the bar way too low if you're just looking at public school standards, which leads me to my third point of, after you've thought about those state standards, then think about, what about your family's standards and your family's goals? Because it's very likely, if you are homeschooling, your family actually has standards and goals that go way beyond just what children would be learning in a normal school. For example, for my family, we are bilingually homeschooling. We're raising our kids bilingual using Spanish and English. So we have the goal of our children growing in their ability to speak and understand Spanish and be comfortable using the language. That's not a goal that would be on a state standard. I also have the goal that I want my children to be very biblically literate. I want them to be able to read the Bible with understanding and enjoy it, not to see it as something hard to understand and mysterious and boring. So I have some goals like that. Whatever your family is and your family's culture, you likely have goals that go way beyond state standards for your family's culture. There's a lot of families that are really into music and musical instruments. So you might have goals for your children to make it to certain levels of mastery with the instruments that they're learning. There are many goals like that, so think about what are your family's goals, and then how comfortable are you feeling about those goals and the progress that you are making on those standards and those goals. Maybe I look at my goal of my children being able to use Spanish and understand Spanish, and then I think, actually, maybe I'm not really doing enough of myself speaking Spanish with them. Maybe I'm reverting to English a little too often. Maybe I need to be doing more so that we can achieve this goal. So again, don't stay in the generally worried cycle, but figure out, are there specific issues that you're worried about? And then think about what you can do about those issues. Number 4, when you are worried, when you're noticing issues, decide on practical ways to measure progress. Record progress over time. Keep records. So this could be taking videos of your child reading, or if your child playing the piano, what a video type of skill. Take videos 1 month to the next month to the next month and look at the progress. It could be keeping samples of work if you're looking at your child's math and writing or different kinds of written work. Keep samples of their work and look at the progress that they're making over time. When you look at these samples, you might realize, oh, there's no reason to worry at all. I'm very, very satisfied with this. Or you might look at those samples and realize, I think there might be a problem here. Then you can come up with a way to address that problem. Then you might need to look into different options, different teaching methods, if you realize something about the way you're doing schoolwork isn't connecting with your children. If you are worried about comprehension or lack of comprehension, give tests. A lot of homeschoolers hate the idea of tests. They have a lot of terrible memories of tests themselves and stress. So they avoid tests entirely, and they're like, I don't know if my child is retaining anything from history or science or anything. And I'm like, you could just give a test. Actually, it can be a really helpful assessment tool. Tests in homeschool don't need to be the same experience that they were in school. They don't need to be stressful. Tests are a great way for you and for your child to know what they know and know what they don't know. Because you could ask a child, so, do you remember a lot about what we learned? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember lots about what we learned. And then you give them a test. Maybe you give them an oral test or a written test or any kind of test, and then they realize, oh wait, yeah, I don't remember almost anything of that. I think I was daydreaming about the dust on the fan when we were reading that chapter. So don't be scared of tests. Tests can be a very helpful tool, especially when you're worried about progress, worried about what are they retaining and comprehending. And they can be helpful for your kid. Taking a test doesn't need to be an emotional, stressful thing. It's just, hey, this is a tool to help you know, do you actually know this? Because when you actually know the information, you're just gonna write down the answers. It's not gonna be like a huge, big, terrible thing. It's just writing down, or it's just saying what you know. Now, one last quick postscript. I want to point out that when some people are talking about worried that homeschool is enough, what they really mean is they're worried about if they're spending enough time on homeschool, or they're worried about whether they're doing enough school books or enough subjects. Now that I would not worry about at all. What I would be concerned with is I'm worried about whether there's enough learning. I'm worried about whether there's enough educational progress. Those would be areas I would be concerned with, because as homeschoolers, we should want our children to have access to the vast feast of beautiful and interesting things that you can learn in this world. And when you don't offer them the feast, when there's no progress being made, then they won't get to at their own level. With every child, it's gonna look different. With every child, the pace is gonna look different. So figuring out the pace that works for your child, but you do want them to be able to progress at their pace and to see what you can do to make that happen. Now, the reason I wouldn't worry about time, I wouldn't worry about the number of school books completed, is because one child could learn as much in 1 hour as another child could learn in 10 hours. Now, that's not to say one child is better than the other. It's just to say the amount of time spent learning does not equate to the amount of learning that occurs. Some children could spend all day doing schoolwork and at the end of the day be like, yeah, I don't know what I did. I don't remember anything I did. Another child could be finished with their schoolwork by 9 a.m. and be talking about what they learned all day long. children have vastly different personalities. I know, I come from a big family. Children have vastly different personalities and ways of interacting with their learning, no matter how you homeschool them. You can homeschool 7 kids in pretty much the same way, and they could all turn out very, very different in their way that they interact with learning. So that's just something I do want you to think about. If you're going to worry more about, okay, how can we make progress? How can we worry about how much they're engaging with what they're learning and how it's impacting their life, their brains, how they interact with the world? Don't worry about the time spent on it, because you are going to have kids that will do endless amounts of schoolwork in seemingly no time at all, and you will have kids that take a very long time to do a relatively small amount of schoolwork. So that was my final thought I wanted to leave you on. Leave me some thoughts in the comments down below. What do you do when you find yourself starting to worry about whether your homeschool's enough or worry that your children are falling behind? I'd love to hear. Bye.